I wanted to show everybody my OpenPilot install on my 2013 Tesla Model S. This should work for pre-autopilot cars, so 2012 to mid-2015, this should work on your car. But before we start, I just wanted to let everybody know I'm not liable for how you modify your own vehicle. If you don't know what you're doing, you can cause damage to the car and unintended consequences while driving. So just make sure you know what you're doing and proceed at your own risk. So with that being said, the first thing you want to do is remove the frunk. Right now I don't have an individual video showing that, so just go on Google and type in Model S frunk removal, and there's plenty of videos showing you how to get the frunk out. Once you have the frunk out, this is what your car will look like. And if you go over to the wiring harness itself, you can see there is a JST connector right here, and it'll come with some heat shrink over it, which you can use later to waterproof that connection, even though it's going to be inside the cabin, but it'll just make sure everything's good. So you want to disconnect this, and then the only parts you're going to need for the first step are these two connectors. So this is the ePass bypass portion. So we'll take that out, and we'll go to the front of the car, and I'll show you where to plug this in. All right, now we're at the front of the car into the hood, and you can see the center of the screen there is the ePass, or the electronic power steering system. The first thing you're going to have to do is disconnect the factory wiring harness from there. Right now I have my bypass harness hooked up, but you'll get the idea. So there's a connector right here. You just squeeze that connector and wiggle it, and it'll come out. And then what you want to do is you take that bypass portion of the wiring harness. So you'll take this connector and you'll plug it into the factory wiring harness over here. So these two will just go together. If you can get it the right way. There you go. So those two go together and it'll click. And then you take the bypass portion, which will only go on one way, and just plug it into where you originally disconnected the factory harness, and that'll also click. Then you see what I did here is I have a wire tie right here to the original wiring bundle just to keep this from moving around. And then you'll route that wire harness kind of underneath the brake booster here, and then towards the back. And then you'll see if we come around here to the side, where the brake canister is, and there's some coolant canister here. If you reach down in through here, you can see the white cable down in there, just routed around those two canisters, and then the white cable up through here. I go underneath the black trim panel here. You go underneath that, and then that'll bring you out to just part of the hood. So one of the features of the wiring harness is that there's a JST connector, and that allows you to disconnect the ePass portion from the main wiring harness. And what this allows you to do is that JST connector is very small. So when you get into the portion where you need to route the wiring harness from the engine compartment into the cabin, you can take this very small JST connector, and right here in between the two body panels, if you look down in there, there's a large opening towards the inside of the car right here, and there's a small opening right here. So you can take the JST connector and kind of put it through that small opening. And the JST connector is actually small enough that you can route it in through here. And you actually see it coming out of the door right there. So I should be able to take it and route it inside the cabin there. So the next step is, once you have the cable kind of routed through the body panels there, is to prepare the cabin and remove some panels. So I've already removed, there is a single Torx bit screw, which is right under here, which holds this bottom panel to the front of the dash. And I've removed that. And then all you have to do is, this side panel comes off. So you just kind of reach in there and pull it off, it'll pop out. Sometimes it takes a little bit of force. Mine's been removed a bunch of times, but this just pops off. And be careful because there's a wire that holds that on. So just kind of let that dangle under there. Then you can see how we're going to ultimately run that wire. It'll come in through here, go under the seal, and then into the dash right there. But you're going to want to remove this panel so that you can route the wires to behind or underneath the cubby. So you just stick your hand in here, you can kind of pull this out. Takes a little bit of force. Okay, now that I have the dash panel removed, you just pop that off once you remove the one Torx bit under here. Once that's off, we can show you how to continue to route the wires. So the E-Pass portion with the JST connector, all you have to do is pull this seal back and slide that JST connector under here. And if you open this side, you'll see it there. And then you run it past underneath this trim piece. So you can just pull this out and slide it, pull this piece of trim back and just slide the connector under here where I have the white wire running. And then I run it through this hole in this metal piece of the dash. So that's where I run my E-Pass cable. And then when you're done with that, what you'll have is this piece will just come out of this hole in the dash, and then we'll connect it to the rest of the harness. Right, once you have the E-Pass portion routed into the dash, we can turn our attention to the rest of the connectors. So this is the OBD2 connector, and there's a couple things coming off of here. So the first thing you'll notice is that there's two JST connectors like this. One of these connects to the E-Pass harness, and the other one is going to be a CAN connection for using comma pedal. If you decide to use a comma pedal in the future, that's what this other one's for. It doesn't matter which one you connect right now, both of them will work. Just know that one is for the pedal and one is for the E-Pass wiring harness. You'll also notice that on this OBD2 connector, there is a standalone JST connector, and that is the CAN bus for radar installation when we start selling a radar kit. So right now this is unused, but in the future it'll be used for the CAN bus to hook up the radar. Okay, so to continue the installation, once you have the E-Pass harness connected to the JST connector here, then this portion connects to the Panda. So I'll do that now, and I'll come back when it's hooked up. What it'll look like once the Panda is connected, and you'll notice that I just take this whole assembly and I push it back into this open part here and kind of just hide it inside the dash. And what's nice about this particular installation is that the Panda is by itself tucked into the dash. So you don't have any wires hanging out down here once you're done. Once it's put back together, the only reason you would know the car has OpenPilot is you'll be able to see the Eon hanging on the windscreen. So then you'll take this connector, and this is the diagnostic port connector. And what I usually do with this is run it underneath the steering wheel here. And once you're done, you'll tuck this up underneath that dash panel that we took off earlier. You can see this white wire is actually from the harness that I have in this car. I run it behind the panels but it doesn't really matter. As long as you cover it up with the dash, it'll look fine. But then you need to connect this to the diagnostic port connector needs to be connected to a port which is under the cubby. So if you just take your hand down here and push it down, you'll see it come open, and underneath here is a diagnostic port. And you see I already have it hooked up to the harness that's already in this car. But what you do is you take your diagnostic port connector and you just plug it in here. And it'll click, and once that is connected, the Panda has power. So you notice that once you plug that in, the lights on the Panda light up. Now, if you bought your Panda from Comma AI, then it's going to be flashing green, which lets you know that you need to put firmware on there. If you bought your Panda pre-flashed with Tesla firmware off eBay, then it should flash like a pink color and blue, which lets you know that it's ready for commands. So the next part will be to run the USB cable from underneath the dash up into the windscreen, and I'll show you how I do that. All right, the first step into routing the USB cable is removing this A-pillar trim piece. And what I use for that is I have a trim removal tool. It's a piece of plastic here. And you'll notice on the side there's a piece of the trim that says airbag. If you pry on this section right here, you can get that to pop out. And then there's a torque screw under there you need to remove, and that will allow you to pull this trim piece off. So I'll go ahead and pop that off, and we'll take a look at what it looks like with it removed. All right, so with that panel removed right here and it loose, you can see that underneath there is a Torx bit. So we can just take our Torx driver and remove this screw. All right, and once you have that screw removed, and there's a little washer on the other side of that screw, but once that's removed, you'll be able to remove this panel, and it just pulls apart. So with that panel removed, you need to be careful because the curtain airbag starts right here. But what I do with that, you can see my USB cable right here, is starting from the dash right here. Here's my USB cable, and I route it along the side up through here, behind this trim piece, which just comes off like that, and then I route it underneath that panel, and then you'll see it come from underneath that panel. I route it behind here. So I route it behind here, behind the airbag, and up into right here in the corner of the windscreen. It goes underneath the headliner. And when you're first doing it, it'll kind of hang out right here. But what you can do is take your trim removal tool, and right here at the beginning of the headliner, you can take that trim removal tool and pull the headliner back and tuck that USB cable in from right here. You can tuck it in all the way until you hit the mirror. And then I pull this piece of trim back. It just clips into place. So I pull that piece of trim back and I run the USB cable along the side until it comes out in the front. And then I run it down around the GoPro mount and plug it into the Eon. Okay, once you have the USB cable routed from the Eon down through the A-pillar and into the dash, then you can just pull it through this hole, and you'll see I have the Panda connected to the OBD2 connector, and then the USB cable is connected to the Panda, and that is all the connections you'll need to make. So you can just take this whole assembly and kind of tuck it back in here. You can make it as neat as you'd like. If you want to use some wire ties, you can do that, but you tuck that back in there. Then we'll reassemble the dash, and then everything should work. So once you get the interior put back together, and you get the dash panel reinstalled, the A-pillar back in place, you get the torque screw right here put back in, and the torque screw down here reconnected. Your car will be completely put back together. You may get a steering assist reduced warning on there, and that's because we disconnected the ePass harness from the ePass, and the ePass requires the CAN data to provide power steering to the car. So the easiest way to determine whether or not your harness is working is when you turn the car on. First of all, that message will probably go away. Secondly, with the car on, you can turn the wheel. If you have power steering, then even if the message stays on the screen, it'll stay there for 30 seconds sometimes. If you have power steering though, you know your harness is working. The harness, you can't have power steering if the harness is bad. Then the next thing to do is to enable OpenPilot. So OpenPilot will not enable if the frunk is open or if your seatbelt's not on. So you have to put your seatbelt on. You put the car in gear, and then you'll notice on the screen in the top right corner that there's a little white steering wheel. That means OpenPilot is able to be activated. So then if you do a single pull on the cruise control stalk towards you, OpenPilot will enable, and you'll see the green border. So that's how you know it's working. If you get to this step and you see green, then you know your setup is good. So hopefully this was helpful. And if you have any questions, feel free to look me up on Discord. You can send me a message through eBay, or you can leave a comment below.